I'm Officer Jessica Helgeland. I'm from the Cottage Grove Police Department. So thank you all for coming this evening to the Cottage Grove Cares and Monona Cares Coalition Forum with the dangers of prescription drug use leading to heroin. I'd also like to welcome our speakers this evening for sharing their knowledge with all of us. First up, we have Michael Roundtree, MD. He is a fellow in addiction medicine at the University of Wisconsin. He's been a family medicine physician for 20 years and has watched as our current opioid crisis developed. Initially, he helped patients wean off addictive medications, but slowly moved into a full-time addiction practice, prescribing methadone and Suboxone to patients in the mountains of North Carolina. He decided to take this year to complete his addiction medicine fellowship so he can better treat the most complex patients. Dr. Roundtree lives in Madison with his wife, 10-year-old daughter, and dog Chupacabra.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bear with me just one moment. Dr. Brust, I think we'll need you. I'm an addictionologist, not an IT person, so I apologize.
Luckily, I'm pretty good with IT, right, Chris? I got it, IT. There you go.
I'll just hold on to this. Just let me know if you have any trouble hearing my voice. Okay, so I've been asked to speak on the path that people take and the addictions that occur before they are addicted to heroin. Most opiate addiction that we see eventually will graduate to heroin. Just for economic reasons, for ease, the fact that heroin is easier to find than pills. And so I've been asked to focus on this area of it. So that's what we'll be talking tonight. So I am a fellow in addiction medicine. I've been doing it for about 9 months now, and I'll finish the program in about 3 months. But I've been practicing medicine for about 20 years now. So today, this evening, these are the major issues that we're going to be covering. How did America get into this mess? How do people become addicted to opiates? What can I do to help my family avoid it or my friends avoid it? What addiction symptoms will look like if I think someone I know has an addiction? What do I do about it? And then what are the treatments that they can seek? I've kind of broken up the talk a little bit by using these wonderful old advertisements and medications. So here's a bottle of heroin that was over the counter, used to be sold. So the first question, how do we get into this mess? How did America's opioid crisis sort of explode over the last few years? It's been a slow-moving problem that started essentially in 1980. I don't know, has anybody heard of the Porter article, quote-unquote? So in 1980, this quote-unquote article, in other words, paragraph, was submitted to the New England Journal by Dr. Porter and Dr. Jick. In it, they wrote that they had been seeing patients over the last 10 years or so. They estimated that they had taken care of 11,882 that had received narcotic at some point, and only 4 of them had become addicted. They therefore concluded that narcotics are not addictive to people who are in pain. So this wasn't a study. This isn't science. This is just one person's view of what they've seen. This was also done by a hospitalist. So when people would come in, they may only get one shot of something. Let's say they had a kidney stone, something along those lines. But it didn't really talk about chronic pain. But this article is then referred to, I say article very loosely, this article is referred to over and over in the future as proof, quote unquote, that opiates and narcotics are not addictive if you're in pain. In 1995, Purdue, the drug company, came out with OxyContin. It was approved by the FDA. So it is a long-acting opiate, and they figured out that if they could sell this by going directly to doctors' offices and essentially advertising. So when I was in practice, I would frequently have people come to my office. They'd be standing there. Maybe some of y'all have seen it, who, in your doctor's office, a person in a suit standing there. They would bring me lunch. They would bring my staff lunch, and then they would talk about OxyContin and what a great drug it was. Purdue really perfected this in about the mid-90s to where it really became a machine. So I was having people coming in, usually about once a week, sometimes twice a week, barraging with this information. And they did this all over the country. It was incredibly successful from their point of view. So far they've made $35 billion on OxyContin. Right about the same time in the 1990s in Salt Lake City, the new specialty of pain medicine also developed. These were people who were trying to treat pain more aggressively, trying to help patients. And of course, they had read the article that narcotics were not addictive. Purdue was coming in saying, we have a long-acting one that's even better, use it. And so they decided to start using pain medications much more aggressively. And really the whole pain medicine field started to flourish. Somewhere in the late 90s, 1998, the VA decided that every patient who had a visit was going to have their pain evaluated on the fifth vital sign. So normally we take pulse, respiration, blood pressure, things along those lines. Well, they decided that the fifth vital sign was now pain, and every patient had to have it recorded. There are some problems with that in that pain is not objective. It is completely subjective. There is no test for it. And when patients ranked their pain as high, the doctors all over the country, myself included, we were not trained in how to deal with that. We were used to taking care of acute pain, but when we saw a patient over and over and over again who was saying they were in pain, nobody had ever taught us what to do. Somewhere around the mid-2000s, pretty much everybody had accepted that pain medications, opiate medications, do not cause addiction if you use them for pain. Of course, that leads to the conclusion that if they're not addictive, why do we reserve them for the most severe pain? Why don't we give them for everything? Sprain an ankle, here's some opiates. Twist your finger, here's some opiates. You can use them in anything because they're not addictive. And then you see the problem. Statement number one is not true. And that is where our problems have begun. Opiates are addictive in pain. They're addictive for anyone who takes them for any length of time. So the result is, by the mid-2000s, we had hundreds of thousands of patients on high-dose opioids who could not stop them by themselves. Opioid pills became a cultural phenomenon in order to take them. The problem was once the doctors cut off the person, once the pills ran out, the patient had the addiction. What are they going to do then? So that's when people started turning to heroin as an inexpensive way to treat their addictions. So here's a good one. Little break in our thing. Cocaine tablets. Works very well for allergies, probably does. Cures nervousness, not so sure on that one. Don't think it helps sleeplessness either. So what is addiction? When we talk about it, it's important to kind of understand some of the terms that we use, because when I say addiction, I'm using a very specific term when I say that. And we tend to apply it to everything, anytime somebody's taking opiates or narcotics. So first of all, let's talk about drug abuse. So when you're abusing a drug is when you're using it to get high. So if you're using pain medications to treat pain, you're not abusing it. It's a prescribed medication. You're taking it to relieve your pain. But if you start to take it because you like it, that's when you start to abuse it. So taking pills is an example of that. Smoking crack. Basically, this is everything we think of when we think of recreational use of opiates and drugs. Number 2, drug dependence. I see this quite frequently, and it keeps me in business. Everyone who takes a narcotic or an opioid for any extended period of time will become dependent on that medication. What that means is if they stop it, they will go through withdrawal. Now note the difference. Dependence is not the same thing as addiction. True addiction, when I say I use the term very specifically, is when you have lost control. Now this is obviously a continuum that people usually go through, but treating drug dependence can be treated by simply tapering down on the dose slowly and working with people. Addiction, that doesn't work because they have lost control of the ability to take right amounts, store medication appropriately, and use it appropriately. It is that loss of control that truly defines addiction. So, going to do a little test. Everybody can play in their own mind. This is the DSM-5, which I refer to on a daily basis. And we're going to go through the criteria for if you or someone you know has an addiction. Again, I do this time and time again throughout my day. So all questions that I'm going to ask, you should consider them over the last year. You should look for patterns in answering yes or no, not a single incidence. This also works for alcohol, so you'll see some of the alcohol, or some of the questions refer to alcohol also. So you give yourself a 1 point for every yes. All right, number 1. Have you or your loved one used a substance in larger amounts, or for longer than intended? Yes or no? Good example of this, I hear this frequently in alcohol. Folks say, I'm just going to go out, my plan is I was going to go out to a bar, I was going to have a drink with my friends, and then I was going to go home. They end up drinking 10 drinks instead. They lose control. They took longer and they took more than they had intended when they left. So that's number 1, yes or no? Number 2, have you had an unsuccessful effort in cutting down? So, have you tried to stop before and not succeeded? Have you thought, you know what, this is becoming a problem. I really need to stop doing this quite so much. But you didn't change your behavior. Number 3, are you using excessive time getting, using, or recovering from a substance? I think a good example of that is driving around at night trying to find opiates, pills, heroin. Another example, which some of us can relate to, is hangovers. Again, one time, every once in a while, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about patterns of behavior. So give yourself a yes if you or someone you know is having trouble like that. Number 4, do you crave that drug? Do you dream about it? Do you think about it throughout the day? Yes or no? Here's number 5. Failure to fulfill a major responsibility because of the drug. So are you missing work because of your use? Are you forgetting to pick up the kids from school because of use? Again, everybody forgets things sometimes. What you're looking for is patterns, and you're looking for the drug causing the issue. Yes or no? Number 6, continued use despite relationship problems. So you're fighting with your spouse, you're fighting with your kids, your parents are telling you there is a problem, and yet you still continue to use. Yes or no? There are 11 of these. Number 7, have you given up pleasurable activities in favor of use? So you quit fishing, you quit going out with friends, quit going to movies with your kids? Yes or no? Number 8, are you using it in physically hazardous situations? So DUIs are probably the best example of that. Again, a single DUI might have been a mistake in your life. It's a terrible mistake, but it's a singular mistake. It doesn't necessarily mean you're addicted. But if you're having more than that, and even if you're not arrested, if you know you've been doing it, give yourself a point. Number 9, physical or psychological problems because of use. Are you having trouble with depression because of your use? Sometimes that's hard to tease out. Are you starting to have trouble with your liver? Are you getting skin infections from heroin? Yes or no? Number 10, tolerance. This does not apply to prescribed medications, by the way. Do you need the same or more pills in order to get high? Do you need more alcohol in order to get drunk? Or in my case, do you need more coffee in order to wake up in the morning? Yes. And the last one is, have you had withdrawal? So are you shaking in the morning if you're not drinking? Or have you had the runny nose? Essentially, it looks like almost like an allergy in people who are having opioid withdrawal, except they feel like they have an awful flu. So, if you scored 0, you don't have an addiction. They don't have an addiction. They may have use, they may have risky behavior, but it is not an addiction in our sense of the word. 1 is at risk for a addiction, but then after that, you see you do have an addiction disorder at that point. Most patients that I see in my clinics are 6 and above. All right, another good little break. So that's morphine. Used to be sold over the counter as cough syrup. Okay. If your test was positive, or if it's positive for a friend of yours, how did it happen? What happened? There are two ways, really, that people become addicted. Recreational use is, again, the one we traditionally think of. Yeah, this is usually people start when they're younger, they're partying, they're using for fun, and they start to lose control. Most people don't understand that the much more common way to become addicted is through prescribed medications. So you had a car accident, you broke your leg, you had surgery, you had your appendix taken out, you were given pain medications, and you are taking them according to what the doctor says. But you're healing slowly, and you find yourself in pain much longer than you would expect and much longer than the doctors would expect. So you keep taking the pills. They keep prescribing them to you because you're in pain. Over time, you find those pills are no longer working. You're taking the same amount, this is the tolerance, but it's not helping anymore. Also, you start to feel terrible. Your pain gets a whole lot worse, and you become sick if you stop taking them. Eventually, what happens to folks is that they lose control. The pills become the most important thing in their lives, and then if they have trouble finding them, they will turn usually to heroin. How do I keep this from happening to me or anyone in my family? I think it's important to understand that true addiction that I'm talking about here, that real definition, is largely genetic, probably about between 40 and 60% genetic. What that means is if someone in your family has had an addiction, the odds are much higher that others in the family will develop an addiction. Mostly that's important for the recreational use. It's important to talk to your friends, your kids, about recreational use, particularly if you have addiction in your family, because the odds of them becoming addicted are much, much higher. I did want to cover just some very specific things that you can do post-operatively, because eventually we're all going to have something happen to us. We're going to get in accidents. We're going to have surgeries. To sort of distill it down to the essence, you use everything you can use before you take your opioid prescription, and you talk to your doctor about what all the different things you can use. Now, I'm going to have them listed up here. This is not a test at this point. You guys aren't going to memorize it. But you'll see that there are a lot of options that you can use. Usually what I recommend is after a surgery or a major trauma, you get that prescription for a short prescription for opioids. You have it on hand, but you do not take it unless everything else isn't working. The problem many people have, and a lot of it's, the problems we have are because people are turning first to the opiate when they're in pain. So what are our options? Number one, nerve blocks. I've had nerve blocks done before on my shoulder. They can actually be repeated. Many women have had epidurals. It's a good example of a nerve block. Number two, TENS units. TENS units are electric stimulators. Again, I've used them before in the past myself. They block the conduction of the nerve to the brain, and so it fools the brain into thinking that there's no pain or that there's significantly less pain in an area. These can be purchased over the counter now, by the way. Ibuprofen and acetaminophen actually can be remarkably effective, particularly in orthopedic surgeries or orthopedic injuries. A good study of children with fractures showed that ibuprofen was as effective as opiates in fractures. As effective. It's the same. In adults, it's probably not quite as effective, but at the same time, it is remarkably effective when used. Usually what I recommend to people is that they combine the two. So you take your prescription strength ibuprofen and you take your Tylenol at the same time if you feel like you need to do that. You're combining things together. Ice has shown to be helpful. Orthopedic braces can help. Muscle relaxers can help. They're very mildly addicted, but nothing compared to the opiates. They help calm the muscles that are around the post-surgical site or the trauma site. Lidocaine patches. You can slap them on. You can't put them on an open wound, but you can put them on around one, and they can numb the tissue. Neuroleptic medications, gabapentin, which some of y'all will know about. Again, not considered an addictive drug right now. It may be, but much, much less than the opiates, and it's been shown to, if given to people, they take opiates less post-op. Guided meditation also helps. This is something that does take some planning on your part, in that you have to kind of figure out how to do that before you're going to have a surgery, but it does work very well for pain. So you combine all these things together. If they're not working, then take your prescription. That's fine. Take your prescription. But don't take it for longer than you need to, and keep using the other things consistently. All right. So that's how to stay off of, or to keep from getting an addiction. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup is a very well-known morphine compound that was given to children in the 1800s. All right. Still not sure. What other symptoms can you look for in people? In kids, young people, rapid changes in their grades or missing school where they didn't before. Things missing at home, money missing at home. Things missing at home usually are going to be pawned or they're going to be traded for drugs. Loss of interest in personal grooming. Rapid weight loss or weight gain. New friends who are quote-unquote cool. An interest in drug culture. This was big when I was a teenager, where we would wear our marijuana shirt or whatever it is, but on T-shirts, on posters, things along those lines in the room. And finally, of course, the behavioral changes, which we all sort of expect. And it's hard to tell a teenager from an addiction sometime. Average age of first use, 13 years old. There are physical signs of addiction that you can look for. They're pretty hard to read, though. So police officers know how to do this. Medical people like myself know how to do this. It's not easy, though. But if you pick it up, it's pretty specific if someone's acting erratically. So pinpoint pupils, the constriction usually indicates that they're on an opiate at that time. Of course, the signs of intoxication, everyone knows. And in withdrawal, the shaking and sweating. The physical signs are much harder to pick up on. For an adult, we talked about the missed work and adult responsibilities, like picking up the kids. Denying that the substance is a problem. It usually means that the substance is a problem. Money missing, things missing from the house. Hiding things. So if your spouse or parents are hiding the equipment that they use in their drug use, that's a bad sign. Aggression at points with extreme fatigue in between and loss of previous interests. All right, so we went through some of the criteria. We did the test on to be able to tell if somebody has an addiction or not. We talked about some of the other signs that you can look for, some of the physical signs. So if you are convinced that you or someone else has a problem, what do you actually do about it? Number one, with youth, kids, try talking to them first. This is from the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, which, by the way, has a wonderful website. So mentally prepare yourself. this is not going to be a good night. They are going to get angry. There's going to be a fight. They're going to deny it. And you have to prepare yourself and remember that you're doing this out of a place of love for them. You're not trying to confront and make their lives hard. Talk to your spouse or partner before you do it. Make sure that you're both on the same page as far as what you're going to do, what you think is happening. Those of us with older kids understand sometimes they kind of turn their parents against each other. Be prepared to be called a hypocrite. If you've used drugs before or if you've had addiction problems, it's okay to admit it. It's also okay to tell the truth, which most of us in this room have figured out. That though you've experimented with drugs, you realized that it is not the answer for anything. You probably want to gather some evidence because they will deny. Again, going through someone else's room or things is extremely uncomfortable. No one wants to do it. But if you're reminding yourself, again, you're doing this from a place of love. You are trying to help them. It's good to go through, get that evidence together, get it out of their control. Resolve to stay calm, expect them to be angry, and have realistic expectations when you do it. You would like the child to say, you know, Dad, Mom, you're right, I have a problem, and I'm going to quit. That's what we would all want to hear happen. Realistically, that's not how it starts, though. More realistic would be to set boundaries and talk with them about consequences. One thing I recommend to parents is that they make it very clear, if you're allowed to go out at night, when you come in, I am going to smell your breath and hair. That's just part of the standard right there. The other thing to consider is taking away the keys if they're driving. This is actually more inconvenient for the parents than it is for the kids, but I think is probably necessary if they're using. People recover from drug abuse. People do not recover from DUI accidents. How do you help a friend? For our younger folks in the audience, you let them know that you're worried about them. Kindly. You don't have to confront. Just let them know that you're worried about their drug use. And then sit and listen to them. Be a friend for them. Usually when people are starting to have trouble with addiction, they're starting to become socially isolated. They've lost all their old friends, and now only their cool, using friends are the only ones they're talking to. So sitting and listening to them helps. Do not use in order to feel closer to them. And finally, ask them if they'll join you to go talk to somebody. Come on, we need to go talk. Let's go find somebody. Most kids can think of somebody they can trust that they can talk to. Hopefully you can get that person to go with you. But if they refuse to, you need to let them know, well, I have to let someone know. And then you go and talk to that person without them. The optimal thing is if they go with you and say, okay, I'm starting to have a problem. Please help me. How do you help adults? Number one, don't even bother talking to them when they're drunk or high. You're wasting your time. Focus when you talk to them on their behavior. I don't like what you did last night. I love you. Don't be surprised if they're not ready to change, much like with the kids. It is not a single conversation that you're going to have. It's going to be a process. Consider going to Al-Anon or Nar-Anon. Al-Anon, I'll just abbreviate and say Al-Anon, is an organization for spouses, partners of people with addiction. and they're very good about talking to people about how to deal with that. It also helps to remember that at the bottom of it all, they have to be the one who changes. Kids, that's a little different. You can say, you're going to rehab. Adults, you can't do that. You can try, but you're pretty much wasting your time. They have to be the one who wants to change. So you've tried these things. You've tried talking to them. You've tried reasoning with them. You've done this over the course of months, trying to get them into treatment or to do something differently, and it's not working. Nothing's changing. Time to turn to professional help. Good old Google. Addiction treatment in my area is remarkably effective, actually. The first thing that pops up is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration Behavioral Health Finder. So you put in your zip code. Again, I do this on my phone 10 times a day at the hospital to help people find services wherever they're living. And it will pop out all the behavioral health and Suboxone providers, things along those lines, in your area, and you can choose what you like. They even pop out on a map so you can look to see where they are. Some primary care doctors are starting to treat addiction also. Certainly you could start there and they can refer you. So what are the treatments now? To me, this is a pretty impressive treatment, cough syrup, by the way. So it's got alcohol, cannabis, chloroform, and morphine. That's impressive. What are our current treatments? Number one, counseling. Counseling helps everybody. Doesn't matter the state of or the level of addiction that you're experiencing, severe, moderate. It's good for everybody. There are individual counselors that are specialized in drug and alcohol. There's good old AA and NA, which are also great places to start. Again, Googling the AA near me will pop up hundreds of meetings in this area. Suboxone treatment, which is primarily what I prescribe these days. Suboxone is an opioid. It is a replacement for an addiction to opioids. It is not something that you want to do unless you need to, unless the other things are not helping. But if they're not helping, this will help amazingly. Usually you see a provider, a physician, once a week, and you get your prescription, just like you would anywhere else. You go over to the pharmacy and you fill it. There's also methadone treatment clinics in our area. There are now 3. A new one opened up 2 weeks ago. With methadone, the patient's going every day for every day, except for Sundays. They are handed the methadone, which is this pink liquid here. They're observed as they take it, and then they can go back about their lives. Usually these open up about 5 a.m., so people are able to go to work afterwards. Their primary advantages are methadone is probably a slightly stronger drug. You're able to go up on a higher dose. And there's always counselors there, 24/7. Well, not 24/7, but whenever the clinics are open, the counselors are there, so you can go in and talk to someone whenever you need to. Naltrexone is a shot or a daily pill that can be taken. It works best in stable patients. And I would like to see more people discharged from jail in prison on it. There are insurance problems with it doing that, but the problem is most people have to be off the opioid for a week before they're able to get the pill or the shot. And the definition of addiction is loss of control. So most people I see are not able to control their use for a week. Finally, good old naloxone that we think about quite a bit and is in the news quite a bit. This is what's carried by the EMS, by the police officers. Many businesses have it on hand now. This is the shot that you give people when they overdose. If you ever need to give this to somebody, go ahead and call 911. Nowadays, with the fentanyl and carfentanil, what people are injecting is much, much stronger than it used to be, even just 2-3 years ago. And so I'm frequently seeing people who are requiring 10 of these to stay alive. I've seen 2 patients this week who require a drip of it that never stops in order to stay alive. So one shot will keep them alive for a short period of time. Go ahead and call 911 though, but even if they seem to be waking up, because they may need more. And that is the end of my presentation. So if you're going to take any of these old ones, use this. So this is Dr. Hand's remedy that contains no stupefying narcotic drugs.
So just to follow up a little bit on the doctor's presentation, our goal tonight is to just sort of provide a little bit of a local face on the problem with drugs, mostly focusing on opioids as it is a epidemic that we're facing here. Again, my name is Matt Nordquist. I'm a detective at the Madison Police Department. I'm currently assigned to the Dane County Narcotics Unit. George Meyerhofer is a detective with the Dane County Sheriff's Department. He's also assigned to the Dane County Narcotics Unit. It's both of our second stint in the Narcotics Unit, so it's a type of policing we both enjoy, but we also are here because we feel like we have an honorable mission. The enforcement portion, understanding that it is definitely a multi-tiered battle that we're in as a society right now, and our portion that we mostly focus on is the enforcement end of it, understanding that that's not the end-all be-all, and we're not going to arrest ourselves out of this situation. The role of the Dane County Narcotics Task Force is to basically disrupt and dismantle drug trafficking organizations. Just a few numbers of some of the things that we've come across for a calendar year 2017. We had 314 criminal charges from our unit. We have about 18 to 20 people in our unit, which means basically throughout Dane County, much of it in the city and the surrounding areas and in rural areas, we're not going to have enough people who can focus solely on the enforcement of drugs to be able to follow up on every tip, to be able to help everyone who we possibly could, but we do our best. 261 of the 314 criminal charges were drug-related. 116 of those were delivery of heroin charges. We did 50 search warrants, so about 1 per week. We recovered 47 firearms. You see the number of the street value of drugs seized. Our largest single seizures were 2 kilos of cocaine in one instance, 70 pounds of marijuana, and a kilo of methamphetamine. In regards to opioids, the prescription pill, heroin, fentanyl, synthetics, those are the issues that we deal with, mostly heroin, and what is increasing more is the fentanyl-related issues. As the doctor described with fentanyl, it is extremely dangerous and potent. There are a multitude of reasons why it's becoming more common. It is significantly more dangerous for the people in the community. It's significantly more dangerous for us. In fact, we've changed our SOP in which how we even property tag the drugs that we're dealing with. We have to do it in what's called this buddy system because nationwide officers have overdosed just from small exposures. We have the naloxone in our property room so we can self-administer if we have problems, things like that. These are issues that we consider. There's issues that people in the community should be considering as well. One of our largest heroin single seizure was 1 pound, 460 grams of heroin fentanyl mix. A person may ingest as little as 0.2 grams at a time, which is why it's becoming more popular because it's cheaper. You have to ingest a smaller amount, you get a greater high, and that's why it's also cheaper for the producers to manufacture and send up here. This single seizure here meant that there were 2,000 fewer opportunities for someone locally to use and potentially overdose or die. So every time we're able to get a drug off the street, that's the possibility of preventing an overdose, and we do actually think about that. That's one of the portions of our mission that helps put a face on it. When you see these overdoses, you understand sort of why we're doing our portion of it. How big is the problem? Some past numbers just to show exactly how it has progressed here locally and specifically in the city of Madison. So last year, 2017, we had 11 homicides within the city. That was a record. It was big news. We were wondering when it was going to stop. Many of those homicides were drug related. Not all of them, but there's portions of drug involvement that are related to drugs. A lot of it is marijuana because there's such huge amounts of money involved with marijuana. There were 44 overdoses in the city of Madison, overdose deaths in the city of Madison, so 4 times the number of homicides. So we have all this community uproar and response over 11 homicides, 4 times that number of people died of opioid overdoses just in the city. And considering some of the changes in response that we have, I think that's noteworthy because every cop within the city is carrying naloxone on them. We have extra training and, quite frankly, extra experience in understanding overdoses, what's going on. When the call comes out, for the most part, you can call it. If someone has become a pulseless non-breather, where they are, their age, you have a pretty good idea going there what that call might be. So people are getting responses quicker. We're able to get first responders, the medical community to respond, but yet we still had 4 times the number of overdose deaths than we did homicides last year. Again, heroin and fentanyl were the cause of most of these deaths. Overdose statistics, just from 2014 to 2017. We had 82 total overdoses in 2014. By 2017, that had gone up to 338 total. As you look at the overdoses, 71 at the top there, 52 of those were heroin, 19 other unknown. A lot of times where that comes from is they're just not able to isolate that it was specifically only heroin, but heroin was still a portion of that overdose, and that gradually increases to 294 overdoses, 199 of those isolated to specifically heroin. And again, many of those are saves based on first responders, the medical community, people who are with those who have overdosed responding appropriately and getting people the help they need during those precious minutes. But again, we've gone from 82 to 338 in a matter of a few years. Just another example of this, a friend of mine who was undercover with our unit in the mid-2000s, in his 2 full years undercover, he purchased heroin once. And he indicated that's because it was such a small using community over that time that new people didn't come in. New people weren't accepted because most of the people in the community at that time who used heroin knew one another, so a stranger wasn't really allowed to come in and purchase heroin because it was fishy. Now it's done hundreds of times a year by our unit. So it's definitely progressed over the last few years, much in common with what the doctor was saying, just a little bit of a local face. Why are they increasing? Again, the rise in fentanyl, the legally prescribed opiate for pain relief, 25 to 40 times more potent than the equivalent quantity of heroin. It's produced in unregulated labs around the world. These labs and the cartels and the producers have understand that they can produce that for a fraction of the price than they can produce the equivalent amount of heroin. They can get it here and make more money. It just becomes a matter of capitalism, really. It's a synthetic variation of heroin, fraction of the cost. Again, I don't need to read this verbatim to you guys, but as the fentanyl problem is increasing, so is the risk to our community at large. What does this mean for us? It's extremely nerve-wracking because it is so volatile and unregulated. It's a product that can be consumed daily by the user, but because it is so unregulated, the amounts, the purities that you're getting, you just don't know what you're ingesting. You may think you're ingesting heroin when in fact you're ingesting fentanyl or fentanyl cut heroin, because again, the producers realize that if you cut it, you take some heroin out and you add fentanyl, purchasers are going to understand that they got a better high and they're going to appreciate and buy more, except you're going to have to give them less. So again, it's this damaging cycle that we're in of people trying to get, or I guess, drug sellers and drug producers taking advantage of people who have addiction-related issues. The stronger high that we talked about, the less that is needed. Drug dealers advertise a strong product by bragging about it. It becomes people understand that if people are overdosing, that it's a good product. So it's not necessarily seen as a turnoff, it's seen as something that it wants to be ingested. People want to take it because, again, you're not thinking clearly when you're in the throes of addiction. You're thinking about how to not be sick. You're thinking about how to make your money go as far as it possibly can, because this is an extremely expensive addiction to have, and you need to figure out a way to regulate it day by day. So this is how, in some instances, people do it. The end result is a cheaper, more deadly product, both locally and nationwide. Lethality of fentanyl. 2 milligrams of powder next to the penny here, just to show people, illustrate the small amount that, that can be lethal with just a small exposure, purposeful or unintended. Our role is the enforcement for those responsible for distributing this deadly and illegal drug. So we understand we can't arrest our way out of it, but we've also come across over and over the families of people with addiction issues and those who have have been able to battle them and come onto the other side, so to speak. And many people have said over and over to us, parents or people with addiction issues, that in many ways the place that they've started the road to recovery is in jail, because that's the time you're able to reset a little bit and you're able to get away from all of these pressures outside. It's somewhat regulated. We've had parents say over and over again, the only time that they feel relatively comfortable or sleep well is at night is when their child is in jail, because they don't think, they feel comfortable that they're probably not going to get that call. And that's a devastating piece of information to receive, but at the same time, it does give us at least some positive reinforcement for our work. And then as we start that, then we try to move our way up the ladder and get those responsible for who don't have addiction issues. All they're doing is preying upon people who do and trying to make money and moving on to the next group, and they don't care. Drug dealing is often accompanied by other dangerous and illegal behaviors. Firearms, violent use of firearms. I think we said 47 guns just our unit got last year. That's almost a gun a week. It's become considerably more, the firearms, over the years that I've been a police officer, which is the last 16. Human trafficking is now becoming extremely intertwined with drugs, and we won't move into a human trafficking presentation, but obviously that is a growing issue within our country and our communities, and something that needs to be combated as well. And I think that these two, drugs and human trafficking, can certainly be, the battle can be intertwined, and we can hopefully come to some sort of positive resolution. Sexual assault, child abuse, child neglect, these things, they just go with drug usage, drug dealing, the exploitation of people around drugs. It's incredibly sad. Both of us have been involved in numerous executions of search warrants, and when you get to the point of seeing children who now are through their third or fourth SWAT search warrant because they're the children of drug dealers, it really hits home as to how this epidemic is affecting even the youngest of us who don't understand and are only modeled this type of drug dealing behavior. As I've said, we will not arrest our way out of this problem, but to deter, disrupt, and dismantle those persons and organizations responsible for drug dealing is our main goal. We try to battle it every day. Some days we're more successful than others. We see it from all ends, and hopefully neither of us are smart enough to understand how to deal with this problem on a macro level, but as we work our day-to-day within Dane County, we hopefully can be a part of moving in a more positive direction. Community outreach clearly is something that's vital to us, and that's part of why we're here. Again, we can't only arrest people and get out of this problem. So we partner with community stakeholders, we partner with different for-profit government agencies, anything we can do to try to be involved in moving in the right direction when it becomes, or when we speak about this opioid epidemic. One of the programs that the Madison Police Department and the local communities are pretty excited about is the MARI program. It's an acronym, I believe it's Madison Area Recovery Initiative. It's a program designed for those who receive criminal charges for nonviolent, low-level drug-related charges, have the opportunity to be involved in a program designed at recovery, and if they follow through on the steps, the footprint, the digital footprint, the arrest footprint of those charges, the Dane County District Attorney's Office is on board. Those charges will go away. We're not interested in getting people criminal charges. We're more interested in getting people the recovery help they need so we can ultimately try to end this cycle. We're here doing presentations. One of the things that's become large nationwide is med drop locations, just trying to get rid of some of these old medications that people have around. You know, you have a surgery, you get injured, you have pills, maybe you take one or two, they end up in the medicine cabinet, you never think about them again, but the teenage son, daughter looking for something related, you know, something to party with, goes and finds them, we don't even know that they're gone, and they end up at pill parties that aren't as common anymore, but used to be more common, and that helped sort of with all of this. So we're trying to be part of helping get rid of all these old, expired opiates and drugs that are out there, getting a sanitary way to get rid of them. So if anyone has any old pills or medications around that they want to get rid of, all the Madison police districts have facilities to get rid of those safely and efficiently. Concerned citizens are our greatest source of information. If you see something concerning, please let us know. Even if it seems small, this is our job. Our job is to filter through things, to follow up on tips, and oftentimes the smallest thing that people see, they notify us, and it can turn into a significant case. And as our slides referred to earlier, even if we just get one shot, one hit of a dangerous opioid off the street, that literally could be a life saved. So any information that people have, we're not adverse to begging. Our phone number is 608-245-5783 for any tips that people might want to provide. Crime Stoppers is also available and anonymous and can be found online if anyone wants to do simply an online tip. Where can we go for help? Safe Communities, Madison, Dane County, just a screenshot of this organization. Again, if people are in need of resources, help, they're a great organization. Other great organizations have been shared, and hopefully somehow we'll figure this all out. Does anyone have any questions for us from the law enforcement end? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, they do. Right in the lobby, there's Ziploc bags, and you can drop the pills right in there. Separate your containers and put the medications in there. The only thing we ask is no sharps. Okay. Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Sky, and as you heard earlier, I am a therapist, and so I'm going to make you do a word association game. Are you ready? All right, I'm going to say a word, and then you have to say the first word or the first thing that comes to your mind. Addict. Come on, be brave. Shout it out. Drugs. Excellent. Thank you for being the brave one. All right, what else? What else did you guys think about? She can't be the only brave one. She's like the second youngest in the room, and she's making you all look bad. Go ahead, shout it out. There's no wrong answers here. Remember, I'm a therapist. We don't judge. Gambling? Was that it? Yes, okay. What else? Lost. Oh, powerful word. All right, I'm looking at you guys right here. Give me something. Drugs, yep. Anybody over on this side? All right. So the World Health Organization did a study of the most stigmatized word in the entire world, and that word is addict. That comes, in every single culture, no matter how you translate the word, the most stigmatized word in the world is addict. And I think that that's something really powerful that we all need to understand. That part of this problem is that, there are these preconceived notions about what an addict is. I will out myself and let you know that I am a person in recovery. I've been in recovery for 15 years from heroin addiction. I am a mother. I am a professional. I am a taxpayer, and I'm a member of your community. There are an awful lot of people like me who are in recovery and have, really turned their lives around. And unfortunately, maybe fortunately, a little bit unfortunately, we decided to be anonymous a long time ago. So you guys don't know about most of us, right? Most of the people that are in recovery don't tell you that they're in recovery. So when we think about addiction, we see the, front page of the newspaper with the deaths and the crime and all of the horrible stuff that goes along with that. And what we don't see is all of the people that are living life in recovery that are a part of your community. A couple years ago, I did a focus group with a group of teenagers. And one of the most profound things that came out of that was that I went through the risk factors for addiction with this group of teenagers. And I'll tell you what those risk factors are, and then I'll let you know what these teenagers had to say about it. So the risk factors for addiction, number one, genetics, right? It's the genes you're born with. Do you have a family history of addiction? That is your biggest risk factor. Second biggest risk factor is the number of adverse childhood events that you've experienced before the age of 18. Those adverse childhood events include any type of physical trauma, any type of sexual trauma, not feeling understood or validated or like your family is close, the divorce or separation of parents. There are things that we don't think are that big of a deal and that we can't, as a parent, we can't control. But those things are so indicative of who will be at risk for addiction. The next thing is the age of use. The first time that somebody uses, how old they are, has a dramatic impact on their risk for addiction. So the reason for that is because during our teen years, our brain is developing. And the way that I like to explain this, and the parents in the room will understand this, is that the teenage brain is actually very similar in structure to the brain of a 2-year-old. And have any of you had to deal with a 2-year-old, right? They become impulsive and overly emotional. That's because their brain is developing in a different way at that time period. When you're a teenager, and I'll try not to use crazy words that nobody understands and everybody's eyes glaze over, but the really smart part of your brain that's logical and helps you make great choices, that part is just growing. And the part of your brain that is all about survival and fun and immediate gratification, that part of your brain is way, way bigger. So teenagers do things that, like, as an adult, we're like, what? Like, why would you ever think that that was a good idea? Just like 2-year-olds do things that we're like, what? When you introduce a substance during that very vital phase of brain development, it actually slows down the brain development. And so people stay in that impulsive, immediate gratification state for much, much longer than they would otherwise. I think that that's really important for all the adults in the room to know, but it's even more important for you guys to know, because not introducing psychoactive substances into your brain when you are young is one of the best things that you can do for yourself. It just is. The research shows it. Just believe me. Don't do it, okay? After I told these teenagers, this group of teenagers, those risk factors for addiction, the first response that I got was, well, none of that's their fault. Right? Can we just sit with that for a second? Right? Like your genetics, the bad things that you've experienced when you were a child, well, none of that's their fault. Right? These teenagers were upset that they had been told all their lives that these were the bad kids. They understood for the first time that these kids had struggles that they didn't have to face. And that's really what I want all of you to get from this presentation tonight, is that the people that are at risk for addiction are a part of our community. At Safe Communities, we're all about collaborating. And we are so happy to collaborate with all the other speakers here and all the different areas of our community. But that means you guys too. You are a part of this community. So I'm gonna ask what you are willing to do to help your community. Because if you see a kid that's at risk, there's also some protective factors that really can change the course of a kid's life and prevent addiction from ever occurring. I know these like the back of my hand because I'm a mom and because I gave my kids bad genetics, and so I think about this stuff a lot. One of those things is having an adult other than your parents that you're comfortable talking to, right? That's such an easy thing. Like just for a kid to have some adult that they trust, that when they're a teenager and they don't want to talk to their parents because that's normal, right? That they have somebody that they can talk to. You know, is that something that you guys can do? Is that one thing that you can do for your community to prevent addiction? Another thing, belonging to some type of team, right? So any interest that your kids have or the kids in your community have, being a part of a team, you know, doing something with other people and having that shared goal, incredibly protective. Would you coach a team? Would you volunteer your time for some type of group that this school puts on? Another thing that's really protective is having stable friendships, right? So not friends that you just met this year, but friends that you've had for a long time. Do you encourage the kids in your life to continue those friendships? Do you give them rides even though you have a million other things to do so that they can see their friend that moved away and is, you know, 2 communities over now? Anything that you can do to protect the kids of this community makes your community safer, not just now, but in the future. And the last thing that I want to leave you with, because this is a lot of information and this is a big problem, and you know, seeing those overdose death numbers, it's always heartbreaking, right? You know, every single number on there was a person with a family and friends and people that loved them. So I want to leave you with a little bit of good news. And that good news is that in 2017, the Monitoring the Future study showed the lowest rate of initiation for prescription opioids since the study started for teenagers. And when we look at a problem this complex, the number of people that are out there dying, unfortunately, that's a lagging indicator because addiction is a chronic disease. And the people that started their addiction as this problem was at its worst are still struggling. And now the drugs that are out there are even more dangerous. But I always like to look at all of the data, and that study gave me a lot of hope that teenagers are getting it, that just because it was prescribed by a doctor does not mean it's safe. And I hope that all of you can take a little bit of that hope away with you tonight and really think about what you are willing to do for your community to keep it safer. So thanks very much. Oh, I guess I should ask about questions. Should I ask about questions? Okay. Any questions? All right.
All right, I'm just going to finish this up real quick. I'm going to stand in the shade over here because the lights are too bright. So I'm going to start right here with the average heroin use a day. Generally what we deal with in drug unit is a half gram. It's going for about, probably right now, $60 to $90 for a half gram, depending on what you get. A lot of times we're buying just a whole gram, which is a full. 180 is about the high end of what's being purchased for right now. And that's what we're seeing. How are people funding this? A lot of the times it's retail theft, credit card fraud, basically just any kind of theft charge that there is out there. That's how they're going ahead and they're funding it. Like Matt mentioned earlier, human trafficking. We have prostitution up there, but right now we're seeing it's more, we're identifying it as human trafficking over actual prostitution. And there's a big deal, a difference if you want to look into it. I'm not going to get into it tonight, but we're looking at that even more as it's not prostitution anymore. So how is heroin used? Smoked, we see that once in a while. Not very often. Snorted, a lot of times that's how people start using it. When that starts wearing out, they start building a tolerance. They start injecting it. And once that happens, we end up where we are now. If you're going to look for any kind of marks, it's track marks, scars on the arms. Those are booking photos that we have taken from our jail. Those are some of the marks you can see on the arms where they inject. So myths versus facts. It's the best high ever. No, tolerance is built up more. The drug is needed to produce the same high. What we're seeing a lot of times with overdoses, people get clean for a while, they stop using. They're clean for a month, a year. When they go back to using, they're going back to the same amount they needed to get high, and it's too much for their body, and it's breaking down. Also, they don't know what they're injecting. It's mixed with fentanyl now. We're seeing a lot of that. Fentanyl is being mixed in cocaine, and they just don't know what they're ingesting or how much they're taking. So the effects of opiates on the brain, you can see on the left there, it's like the old, this is your brain on drugs. Remember the egg would drop into the frying pan? Well, the frying pan is on the right-hand side. So the short-term effects, you're going to see people nodding off, slurred speech, suppression of pain, this clouded mental function. They can't concentrate, they can't think, they can't talk. They seem very tired and confused. You can see the eyes on the bottom there. You're going to see that, pinpoint pupils. You're going to see just real tight, real small. Normal eye is going to be on the right. Long-term effects, you can see that right there. Like the doctor spoke earlier, addiction, tolerance, dependence on drugs. You're going to see collapsed veins, infection of heart, lining of the valves. I mean, it affects everything internally on you the longer you use. So the signs, signals that you should be looking for if you are looking for it, like I mentioned, the nodding, students being truant, grades dropping, change in friends, poor hygiene. We're going to see a lot of that. They just don't have the ambition to shower. They don't want to stay clean. Sleepy, tired. They're going to be dishonest with you. They're going to forget a lot. Cash flow problems, that's going to be huge. If your child is working or your friend is working and they're constantly broke and you're noticing a lot of these signs, start paying attention. The life of a person, it's an everyday routine of buying heroin at least once a day. They have to get that high. A lot of times they're friends, also they're users, they're unemployed, not attending college, they dropped out. Sadly, they steal from family and friends. One case I had, it was a girl, it was Christmas Day. She knew everybody would be at her mom and dad's house for Christmas, so she took her boyfriend to grandma's house and they burglarized grandma's residents stole their checkbook and started writing out checks to themselves, which made them easy to catch because they were cashing them. So what happens when a user wants to stop using? They start withdrawing within 8 to 12 hours. Within 24 to 48 hours is when it kind of peaks. They get very sick. I've talked to people that were withdrawing. They talk about it's the worst flu you could ever imagine. They can't compare anything to it. So you can see there the list of things is what they go through. So overdoses occur period of time when they don't use. Like I said earlier, they start using the same amount as when they were at their peak, and they're overdosing from that. Generally, at home, friend's house, vehicles is huge right now. The drug unit, we're seeing a lot of people, once they buy the heroin, they're using it immediately because they're not feeling well, they have to have it. So we see it all the time. I think people crash on the Beltline. We had that case last year a couple times. They're using it anywhere they can get it. Symptoms of an overdose, you're going to see the slow breathing. That's always there. Drowsy, the pupils, weak pulse, clammy skin, vomiting. They're not conscious. Their brain function starts to cease, and then eventually they pass away. So naloxone, also Narcan, like we touched earlier. Every law enforcement officer, fire department in Dane County, we now carry that. Probably no questions? All right. Oh, we got one. You got me. Yeah, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head what the price is. If anybody does, let me know. But I know it did skyrocket to the point where I know of a jurisdiction in Ohio where basically they said that it's so expensive that if you are on your, I think, third overdose that they're being called to, they were going to stop administering it. I know the fire department said, no, we're going to continue, but the law enforcement agency, they said they were going to stop because it was too expensive. So I know it went up. Yeah. So. That's perfect. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
So that's it for this evening. Thanks for coming. On your way out, if you could please fill out a survey and then just leave it on the cot. Don't forget we have 2 more forums. April 10th is in Deerfield at the Deerfield High School. And then April 17th, the Stoughton Cares Coalition is having their forum at the Covenant Lutheran Church in the city of Stoughton. And I was also told there's a lot of cupcakes out there, so please eat them all. We don't want any left over. Thank you.